Welcome to the Multifaceted Executive, the podcast where leadership meets diversity, innovation, and impact. We go beyond boardrooms and titles to bring you powerful stories and insights from executives of all backgrounds. Get ready to challenge conventional thinking, gain fresh perspectives, and discover the leadership lessons you won't hear anywhere else. I'm your host, Amanda Cosme-Reddie, founder and CEO of the Multifaceted Executive and Take Brand Consulting. Let's get started. Welcome back to the Multifaceted Executive Podcast. I'm your host, Amanda Cosme-Reddie, founder and CEO of the Multifaceted Executive and Take Brand Consulting. For those that are new with us for the first time, a multifaceted executive is a leader that has many facets. They're not defined by any single industry, background, or leadership style, but rather their ability to adapt, inspire, and create impact across different spaces. Joining me today is Mitchell Levy, a global credibility expert and CEO, TED Talk speaker, and an author of over 65 books. He's the creator of the CPoP, which is the Customer Point of Possibilities, a unique formula that helps leaders distill their purpose into a single, unforgettable phrase. We will get into all of that, but first and foremost, Mitchell, thank you for joining me today, and I invite you to further introduce yourself to our listeners, starting with maybe a little bit about your upbringing.
Amanda, thanks for having me. I appreciate that. I've been in Silicon Valley for 38 years, happily married for 37, have a 27-year-old son, and I've started 20-ish businesses on the board of a public firm. We've published over 750 books. One of my bucket list items was to do a commencement speech at a university. I did that and a couple TED Talks. I've lived a really good life so far, but it didn't start that way. Like most of us, stuff happens. I was born and raised primarily in New Jersey. At the time I was 9, my parents got divorced, and mom was a school teacher. A single mom, 3 kids. What I hadn't realized is we were below the poverty line, but I never felt that way. The lesson and the feeling that mom left in her 3 kids is you can do whatever you want. You just have to set your mind at it and make it happen. Went to college at the University of Miami. Prior to that, I was pretty much a C and D student. When I hit the University of Miami, I got lucky enough to want to hang out with 2 gorgeous women. What they did for fun on Friday nights is go to the library. And so that's what I did on Friday nights. I ended up in my first semester getting 2 Bs and the rest were As. My second semester, 1 B and the rest As. And for the remaining 3 years, all As. But I wouldn't have done that without an influence that had me going to the library. And given the guy I was in high school, it's night and day. Wouldn't have imagined that.
I love that because we all go through a transformation at different points in our life, and it sounds like that's what happened to you.
That was one of many. But yeah, that was a good one. I just stepped into it. I consider myself waking up when I hit college. Then I went to the College of William & Mary after that for my MBA. And first semester, I wanted to get all A's to show that it wasn't the University of Miami, and I did that. After that, I relaxed a little bit and enjoyed a little bit more of life. I ended up doing some special work for the finance professor that I was doing an independent study with, and we actually proved a formula he's been trying to prove for a while. We proved it accurate. 2 weeks after doing the proof, I ended up going into his office saying, hey, I'm starting to write the paper. I want to get published. Would you join me? His first word was no. Once again, you go through your mind, what are all the things this could mean? And what he said was, listen, I took your research, I sent it to Colonial Mutual Fund, and they want me to deploy it, and you're going to come with me. That's how I ended up in Boston. My life has been full of serendipity opportunities where the right opportunity presented itself. When I made it out to Silicon Valley, following a girl I met on a bus stop, who is now my wife, I followed her out here, and first job I got to was a startup. If you're not in Silicon Valley, you assume all startups are paved with gold and you make a ton of money. When that one went under after the first year, I then ended up taking the advice of my mom, who was remarried, so my parents at the time, and they said, go to a big company, figure out what you want to do. So I spent the next 9 years at Sun Microsystems. And what was interesting is I enjoyed it I was not a corporate guy because I was looking at the decisions that were made at the top level down, and I go, I wouldn't have made that decision. I wouldn't have done that. I mean, I agree with some, but not all. And so in 1997, during the dot-com days, I'm like, hey, I'm going to start my own business. Since then, I've created 20-ish businesses, and each step along the way was some form of transformation. I've hit the wall twice. I start my business at dot-com days. I'm like, hey, I'm ready. And the first strategic e-commerce consulting job I got was a former boss who said, Mitchell, do you know anything about SEO? And I'm like, no, but I could figure it out. And in 1997, it was pretty easy to figure it out. That was my first job, but I was able to scale that into other things. But the two walls I hit were the walls of the dot bomb and the wall of COVID. Both times I had businesses that essentially went from a really nice 6-figure business to almost zero.
That is a fascinating start. And because you shared so much about your upbringing, I'm going to take a step back, and then we're going to go back to a few points that you mentioned just recently. You talked about your mom in the beginning and how she was a single mom. She was raising 3 kids. Tell me a little bit more about your dad too, because from my understanding, there was a core value that you developed based on your relationship with your dad.
Great question. I don't remember a lot from college days, except I do remember a feeling I had when I was 9. And that's when my parents got divorced. Dad was assistant vice principal in a New York school, do the helicopter dad thing. He would helicopter in, I can't remember if it was once a month or twice a month, and do technically what dads are supposed to do, take the kids out to bowling or movies or something. That was the first time I ever remember asking myself, what is the role of a father? Right? The concept of integrity. I hadn't felt that he had that. And I hadn't really thought about that at all until I was doing my second TEDx, when they want you to dig really deep. Okay, how did you get to where you are? Why did you spend a year and interview 500 people on credibility? Why is integrity so important? And I could roll it back to 9 years old.
Yeah, that's a powerful reminder of how our core values are developed. Oftentimes, they are developed at an early age. We're too young at the time to really appreciate them and live by them, but they do tend to follow us. Of course, different situations in life may change the values that we have or add new values. I think that's really important because, like you said, integrity is a big part of how you operate. And going back to your story, you mentioned that you had met these 2 girls and you started spending some time in the library. There's been a lot of these situations where you run into certain people or opportunities, and something then transpired from that. For people that have maybe a hard time connecting with others or building relationships, what advice would you have for them? Because obviously, you didn't know these 2 people when you met them, and that started a whole redirection of your education. What advice would you give to folks?
That's interesting. Great question. Well, let me give you the definition of credibility, and I'll answer it from there.
Okay.
Credibility is the quality in which you're trusted, known, and liked. Right? And so trust are areas like, are you coachable? One of the 4 values of being trusted, coachability is one of the most important things. When you're talking about getting to know somebody, what I'm thinking about, are they a servant leader? Do they have the intent and commitment to do the right thing? Although these 2 girls were suggesting we do something that I didn't necessarily want to do, I'm like, well, I want to hang out with them, and maybe it's okay. I didn't know, but I knew they weren't doing it for any other reason than they wanted to study and they wanted to get good grades. And there must have been a part of me that says, I could be coachable, right? So when you meet other people, the interesting part is the values that you want to think about is, are they good humans? And one of the most important things as an executive coach, I'm one of the Marshall Goldsmith's 100 coaches. As an executive coach, one of the first things I try to determine is the person coachable? Not that I need to teach or coach. It's just simply, if they're not coachable, if all they're going to do is spout out stuff that they think is important, they're not somebody I want to interact with. The second thing is, are they servant leaders? Third, do they respect others? Right? On being likable, do they respect others? Do they share other people's credit of other people? I call it spreading cred dust. And if you meet somebody and they're initially not doing the things that you would do and the way you would do it. See whether or not they are servant leaders and if they have the intent and commitment to do the right thing. Then step back and go, maybe I could learn something. I may not want to continue doing that, but maybe there's something here that will allow me to see the world in a different way, and put yourself in their hands.
Yeah, that's great, because what I heard, if we stay on the topic of core values, is obviously integrity is one of them, but also servant leadership. My second business is Take Brand Consulting, and so I help professionals with building their personal and professional brand. A lot of that has to do with their core values, their purpose, and their value proposition. But more importantly, when it comes to the core values, it's living by them. It's meeting people and opportunities that align with those values. That's exactly what you found with those two young ladies. And I'm really glad it took off in the way it did. And, you know, you were coachable in the process, and then you moved on to other endeavors. Another thing I want to touch on from your story is the businesses. You said around 20-ish businesses that you've created. Tell us, like, what was the purpose for you around creating these businesses? Obviously, I'm sure, you know, you didn't do it all at once. It happened over time, but there isn't this, you know, idea of serial entrepreneurs. And that is what I see you as. You're creating all of these different businesses. What was the purpose behind that for you? What motivated you to do that? And what do you feel like you saw in terms of the outcomes of all of those businesses that you created?
I'm going to say, instead of calling it a serial entrepreneur, I called myself a parallel entrepreneur. And I'll give you an example of how it paid off, and then I'll tell you the why. During the dot-com days, I had a couple different businesses going on. I was doing the consulting, I was speaking, I was doing, it was basically executive coaching, speaking, running conferences, and running a program at a university, San Jose State University. So like 4 or 5 different businesses. During that time frame, I had one of my former students from San Jose State come to me, and older than me, but come to me and said, Mitchell, I've created a CEO networking group, and I can't actually run it without you. So what if you did zero work and I give you a third of the business? You know, it's kind of hard to say no. The truth is, by the way, you can't run a networking group with zero work. You've got to really work hard to do the networking. During the dot-com days, I had a really nice upper 6-figure business. And my CEO networking business, I was the largest rainmaker, was $60,000. I was just about ready to get rid of the CEO networking business when the dot bomb came. And my e-commerce, all of it. Nobody cared about e-commerce speaking. Nobody cared about, you know, the coaching or consulting. The executive business program started dwindling. And so the business didn't go immediately to zero, but pretty close. All of a sudden, that $60,000 a year looked really good, right? So if I look at my businesses, when I think about a serial entrepreneur, particularly coming from Silicon Valley, I think about the traditional route. You have this great idea, you use other people's money, you get funding, you hopefully eventually go public or have some exit, you make a ton of money and you do it again. For me, I don't know if I want to say I created lifestyle businesses, but maybe I did. Maybe that is the right way to do it. I wanted to create a business that solved a problem. So as an example, how I created the program, the e-commerce management program at San Jose State, is I was teaching there at the time and I ran out of time. I was getting paid about $500 an hour for my consulting stuff, and I was getting paid $110 an hour for teaching. I'm like, listen, I went into the dean. I said, by the way, I never quit stuff. I always say I have to do more. I have to do less. And the dean said, why don't you run a program for us? I'm like, okay. But by the way, that was not on the agenda. I had no time. But I said, give me 3 weeks. Let's get time on the calendar. Let me think about it. So I came back in 3 weeks later, and I go, well, here's what I'd like to do. 5 months from now, introduce the program. In between now and then, I'll market. We'll start with 30 courses, and I don't want you to pay me anything. Just give me 25% of the door, and I'll pay the faculty directly. First thing he said was, hey, listen, we got to pay the faculty. I'm like, okay, just because it's for liability reasons. And then he almost laughed and said, you don't want to get paid anything? You sure? 25% of the door? Okay. He was so quick to sign contracts. And then when we sold 4,400 course seats, took in over $2 million. When I created that program, I knew it had a start date. I didn't know when the end date was. So in the meantime, how can I leverage that for other things? One of the ways I leverage that is while running the program, we had a Japanese firm come to me. I think it was a VP of HR. She goes, "Hey, listen, we'd like to send an exec to your program once a year, and we'd like you to coach them for 4 or 5 months because we really need them to think like Silicon Valley. We need them to think outside the box." I came up with a price point that was, in my mind, ridiculous. And they said yes. I'm like, okay, I can make time. I know the business. And so, to answer your question, where there's a need, and if you're a servant leader adding value and you have the intent and commitment to do the right thing, for instance, Amanda, let's say you and I decided we really, really liked each other and wanted to do a business together. Many people spend so much time working out the details and doing the contracts. I would say, hey, Amanda, why don't we split profit 50-50 and let's get the first client. Business doesn't start till we get the first client. We do the first client together. At some point in time, shit will hit the fan. When it does, all I care about is that you answer the questions that the client has when I'm not in the room and vice versa. At the end of that, we split our money and then we look at each other and say, was it fun? Did we like it? Did we want to do it again? And if the answer is yes, then we do our contracts. Any of my businesses have been that way because most of the time you kind of know who the person is, but occasionally, when things get crazy, you may have made a decision that's not the right one, and you're lucky and happy that you can get out after one client engagement. So that's only happened once. Most of the time, we just start a business and we run it until we either sell it or let it run down because there's no longer a need.
Thank you for breaking that down. One common theme that I heard from your experience is the credibility aspect. People found you credible. They found you as an expert and they found you as someone that can help them either start something that they want to achieve or move something along. Let's get into this because you are the global credibility expert. In all of this, what led you to develop the CPoP?
I didn't know I was actually developing the CPoP when I started my publishing businesses in 2005. And as I mentioned, we've published 750 books. I knew that at some point in time, that business will go away because Amazon was on board and they were continually commoditizing book publishing. My business, that's the second business that got totaled by an event. In this particular case, it was COVID. In 2019, I kind of was thinking to myself, what's next? And I wasn't sure. So I thought to myself, with all the authors that we published, what were they looking for with the book? Credibility. I looked at the definition of credibility and go, that's not right. So the definition of credibility in the dictionaries, and some are updated, some aren't. If I have my way, they'll all be updated. The definition at the time was the quality in which one is trusted. And when I said that it wasn't right, and for me, it's as I sleep on it, I wake up in the morning, and what popped into my head was Napoleon Hill, who interviewed 500 millionaires for Think or Grow Rich. And I go, Mitchell Levy. He's going to interview 500 thought leaders on credibility. And so what came up, and if you're listening to the radio, I'm presenting a chart. The chart is simply the updated definition of credibility, which is the quality in which you're trusted, known, and liked. And what would happen, and for those who are looking, there are 10 values of credibility. You could see integrity, by the way. Integrity was the only value that's listed twice. And let's be clear, I wasn't sure exactly why it was listed twice when I first put it there. I figured it out about a year later. Okay. But that's what the numbers were calling for. And when I was doing the interviews, I had a download one morning and I go, I'm going to interview 500 people and here are the 5 questions. The first question was, what is your CPoP? What is your customer point of possibilities? For the first 50 people, I would send an email and I describe the formula of what it is and how it works. And I would allow people to enter in the green room to start. And I'd say, hey, let's walk through the 5 questions. What happened in the first 50 is that 98%, even though they were given the formula, could not articulate a clean CPoP. And I'm like, okay, how do I fix that? And I'm like, well, let's create a video. I created a video that was 60 minutes long. And so the first question I'd say, did you watch the video? And if the answer is yes, I'd go, well, what do you think? What's your CPoP? And I actually gamified it because here's the interesting part. Even after getting the video and watching the video, the numbers stayed the same. 98% of people came in and didn't exactly have their CPoP accurate. The reason why is that we have been taught all of these marketing cookie cutter approaches of how we're supposed to show up in the world. And it's hard for people without somebody supporting them. It's hard for people to drop the marketing cookie cutter stuff, right? What was interesting is in working in the green room and then working with people, sometimes if in 5 or 10 minutes I could help people get their CPoP, then we would do the exercise. Sometimes what would happen is we'd spend 15 minutes and I go, yeah, we only have 15 minutes left and I don't think we'll be able to get here in time. Here's what I'd like to suggest. Why don't we talk about you? We'll keep answering these questions so you got it. And then you could book time when you're ready. I think 70% of people rebook time. So not everyone
That's great.
not everyone followed through, right? What happened was I didn't know initially what I was going to really focus on. And it turns out, do people come prepared? Do they come on time? How do they interact? Are they coachable, right? I started keeping track of how people actually showed up, both quantitatively and qualitatively. What I learned in helping those 500 and now since then over 500 more companies and individuals articulate their CPoP is I was given a really powerful formula. And that formula is apparently, to me, it's really simple, but it's really hard for most people. What's interesting, it is just a formula. So another formula we all know is E equals MC squared. Now in science, those values are fairly static. So the formula works all the time. With humans, there's so much variability with the inputs and outputs. As multifaceted humans, what needs to happen is that we need to then apply the formula in a framework, which is the methodologies you do with your branding. It's the methodologies you do with the multifaceted. It's the methodologies I do with my executive coaching and with my LinkedIn program, right? There are many different frameworks, but the real value is if somebody could articulate how they show up in less than 10 words. It essentially is where they're executing on their purpose. It essentially is we as humans vibrate at a frequency. It essentially is words that are articulating the frequency they vibrate at if they are servant leaders and they're good at serving others.
So let me ask you this. Do you believe that non-servant leaders are capable of having a CPoP?
So I'm going to answer the question and I'm going to say it's almost, and no one's ever asked that question, so thank you. So it's almost needs to happen on a case-by-case basis. One of my clients is 70 years old. He came to me 3 months ago and he says, hey, I'm a former CFO and I love doing what I'm doing. And I want to keep working for as long as people will pay me. Great. We came up with a CPoP for him. It was the best we could come up with at the time because he had all these marketing cookie cutter stuff getting in the way. About 2 months later, we're in a public meeting. He says, Mitchell, do I have permission to change my CPoP? Now, the point is, it's his CPoP, not mine. I'm not the gatekeeper of you. How your vibrational energy works. I'm like, yeah, of course. He goes, let me tell you what it is. He told me a CPoP that mechanically used the right formula. And his first question, how come you're not excited about it? The thing is, to answer your question, somebody could be a non-servant leader and come up with the architecture and apply the formula to be able to do it. And so what I asked him is, well, why did you change your CPoP? And he goes, well, Mitchell, so I do a LinkedIn program to help people meet their prospects or referral partners and over time learn and grow and apply social selling. So that's what I do. And so he goes, over the last couple months, you've given me the opportunity to talk to a number of people. And I was reminded in the CFO work that I've done, what I like doing and what I don't like doing. So I recrafted the CPoP around what I like doing. And then I was able to respond, I love it, right? Because if they're just words and you don't have the intent and commitment to do the right thing, and you're not a servant leader and you're not coachable human, or you don't have the external and internal integrity to do the right thing, that's where it's not going to work. What I'll say is someone who's not a servant leader, who's really living in the way of trying to serve their clients so they can get paid, can turn into a servant leader just because they aren't today doesn't mean they're not. They may not have ever been shown the way.
That's true. I can't imagine it's too often people are waking up like, "Hey, I'm a servant leader." The kind of from my own experience, I'll say, I found out that I was a servant leader once I started studying. I actually skipped college when I turned 18. The education piece for me was, I'm going to take a gap year. I'm going to start working now, get some experience under my belt, and then I'll go back. Well, that gap year turned into like nearly a gap decade because I didn't go to college until around 2017. I enrolled at Grand Canyon University. That's out here in Arizona. It's a Christian college. It was an amazing experience. That is where I learned about the concept of servant leadership. However, when I read more about it, I sat there and I thought to myself, wait a second, this is what I am. I am a servant leader. By thinking back and reflecting on different actions, the way I feel about people and how I always want to be helpful where I can, while also filling my own cup, of course, right? Because that's something that servant leaders have to watch out for. We don't want to underserve ourselves just to serve everybody else. But that is really where I found what my leadership style was. And it really turned from being a leadership style to being who I am. And so that is deeply integrated into my own brand. So yeah, it's not necessarily every day somebody will come to the awakening that they're a servant leader. But when you do understand the concept and you tie that back to your own actions and the way you live and who you live for, yourself and others, then it begins to make sense. I think what you're doing here too is you're showing the way of what servant leadership looks like. And you probably have clients that are coming to the conclusion of, wow, this is the type of leadership that I respect and I admire, and I want my CPoP to really showcase how I show up as a servant leader and who I serve. Thank you for going into that. And we actually have a surprise for the audience today because Mitchell has been so gracious to give us a sample of what his CPoP looks like, the formula live for you today. And so we're going to do it with me. As you all know, I have a brand. I have 2 companies. There's a lot going on, but just like any other multifaceted executive, because we have so much going on and because we have experience that comes from different industries and we can inspire and create impact across these different spaces, how do you really narrow down on what your CPoP is? So that way it's clear not only to yourself, but to the people that you're serving. Mitchell, you've talked about being coachable. You have me ready here to be coachable and go through the CPoP with you.
Technically, for a super long time, was thinking that we should have one and only one primary CPoP. And recently, as a multifaceted executive myself, I'm like, no, I have 2. I have 2 because it turns out the one that is technically the bigger one from a credibility perspective, that's the one that I share with the world. Sometime during the process, you're like, oh my God, I have all these changes to make. I need to get this level of alignment. And Mitchell, you showed me a path because the CPoP's a compass. So let's create yours. And if you are a DIY person and you could make this work, please do. If you're interacting with somebody else and you know they need it, I do a clarity session once a month, and it's a group session. Everyone in the month gets their CPoP.
Because that was the session I joined, correct? Your webinar, your free webinar, or is that different from the clarity session?
You actually, so it's so funny. I have a couple different things going on, but how I reach out is in 3 ways, right? One, I do a complimentary referral webinar twice a quarter. And it's simply, why are you not getting the referrals that you need? And my clients, if they don't have a complimentary session that they're working, I encourage them to invite their people to that one and to come along as their clarity guide. It works equally as well. The second thing I do is I do have the opportunity to spend a half hour in Zoom. Right. And it's like, hey, I'd love to talk to you, learn more about you. If I could add any value, great. If you get any value to me, great. And so that's the second thing I do. And then the third thing I do, and we charge a fee to participate in a clarity session. It's 90 minutes long. My promise is that you're going to walk out with your CPoP and be happy about it. That's a different model.
Thank you for distinguishing the two, because what I wanted to say is if you haven't met Mitchell by now, obviously you are now, but make sure to reach out to him. We'll share more about how to connect with him after. But I actually did attend the webinar that happened, and I will tell you that was truly an eye-opening experience for me, especially as someone that does help people with building their brand. I thought that my brand and my CPoP essentially, or lack thereof, I thought that it was clear. After going through that webinar, I took a step back and looked at my LinkedIn, my business pages, trying to figure out how do they all align. And when you come into my LinkedIn page, can you tell exactly what I do? And when you go to my business pages, does that reflect what you saw on my LinkedIn? It was just very, again, eye-opening. I highly encourage folks to join in on his webinar or take advantage of the credibility sessions and everything you have to offer. Continue on, but wanted to make sure to throw that out there.
I appreciate you. So the CPOP is two pieces. The way the formula works, it starts off, and I'll ask you questions. It starts off with who. Typically in 1, 2, or 3 words, who is the audience you serve? And having gone through the referral webinar, one of the things that I talked about is we've been taught something wrong. We've been taught to have this wide, bigger audience, and the bigger the audience, the more fish we're going to catch. And I want to say the opposite is true. The more narrow you can craft your audience, the easier it is for people to both refer you because they know who you are and who you serve, and for prospects to identify.
Okay.
So in 1, 2, or 3 words, or whatever, what do you think? Who do you serve today?
I'm going to answer your question, and then I'm going to caveat to what you just mentioned right there. My target audience, who I serve, are executives, specifically multifaceted executives and underrepresented leaders. Now, you mentioned that usually the broader you get, the worse off you are, essentially. These executives and these underrepresented leaders, they can come across multiple different industries and backgrounds and experiences. And so does it count in terms of how broad your own audience is outside of the target audience that you have? Or does that even make sense? Let me know.
I'm going to say it does, and I want to put the and on there. Let's go through the exercise. I'm going to ask you the question again in a different way. If you think about where 80% of your revenue comes from today, who is that?
Okay, executives is where most of my revenue comes from.
Okay, and it's the multifaceted executives?
It's between both, but more so on the consulting side, because I've had that business now for about 3.5 years. So I've had a healthier pipeline. The multifaceted executive is still a little bit newer. It just got launched in January of this year. So working our way towards that.
And when you say underrepresented executive, what do you mean?
I mean different. So traditionally underrepresented means their race, their gender. Are they typically left out of opportunities or at a disadvantage because of really just who they are and their background? And so as an underrepresented leader myself, I'm a Latina, I resonate and I relate to underrepresented groups.
That's interesting. Okay, got it. Thank you. What is their pain point? I'm going to ask you 2 other questions, but what do you think their biggest pain point is?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So there's a couple of them, but I would say that the biggest one is they're tired of playing the game of corporate politics. They really crave humility. They want to help the next generation of leaders be successful, and they want to do all of that without compromising their own values.
Interesting. So if I'm going back to that, that's still now about 80%-ish of the people that you're doing consulting and coaching with?
Yes.
And so they are almost by definition, the way you spoke, they were servant leaders wanting to help the next generation.
Yeah, essentially, because they noticed that there is a transition happening here, right? Baby boomers probably have another 10, 15 years as they start to retire from the workforce. And so they want to support the next generation of leaders that are coming in.
Okay. What would be a pleasure point when you're successful at doing what you're doing with clients? What would they say? What do they get? Not about you, but how are they feeling? What are they saying?
Yeah. Well, for the executives, they are very in tune with wanting to make sure that they have a strong brand. Going back to the corporate politics side of it, a lot of them feel like they cannot be themselves at work, as if it's a real struggle for them to blend their personal and their professional life. And so that the desire out of it all is to be able to bring their authentic self into the workplace and beyond, and be able to attract the right influence, visibility, credibility at high levels. And again, without losing sight of who they are outside of work. Now, on the underrepresented side, from what I've seen, is there's a challenge. There's a huge gap in getting into the C-suite level. Unless they're starting their own business and becoming an entrepreneur, it's difficult when they're working in corporate America and they're trying to advance. Their desire is that executive sponsorship. They want to build relationships with people at the top. That way, when there are promotions or opportunities, they have an opportunity because not just because they know somebody, but because they have developed these very high level relationships that will help them secure that executive sponsorship. And I want to break this down quickly for the audience, because there's a difference. You have coaches, you have mentors, and you have sponsors. I don't want us to get confused here. The coach is someone that is going to be more helping you on demand with certain skills, areas of development. The mentor is really your guide. They're here to guide and facilitate conversations with you, whether they're work-related, personal-related, etc. The sponsor is someone that is putting their own influence and brand on the line to advocate for you. And so that is the difference. Want to call that out for people that are like, what does executive sponsorship actually mean?
So what's difficult here is simply that the multifaceted executive is a new term.
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of cool to have that, because then people ask you what it means.
Right.
The reason I say, what's your CPoP? What's a
Yep.
CPoP, Mitchell? Boom, I can
Yep.
explain it. It comes out, though, you have to decide which of the many hurdles you have in acquiring new clients you want to overcome, right? If you're not getting people who resonate directly with multifaceted executives, and they may not today, it doesn't mean you don't use it, but it may not be part of your CPoP. What people absolutely, I know I asked the question, but what people absolutely resonate with is underrepresented leaders. Now, there's some things going on with the politics today that make that more or less important. Nevertheless, it's a very interesting place to be. And I have two CPoPs I want to share with you. Let me get to chat so I'm a visual, so I'll share it with chat and then we'll talk about it.
Okay.
And I have a pain point and a pleasure point. Normally what happens is that people need to feel or experience it. I'll share it with you. And before I do, let me tell you about my two, so you can feel that energy. I am one of the Marshall Goldsmith 100 coaches. So I typically do coaching with fast-growing company CEOs. My CPoP there is 9 words. It's Inc. 5,000 CEOs leading the future with executive abundance. What happens is, I had somebody say, Mitchell, why are you limiting your audience to 5,000? My only response could be, thank you. Right? Like 5,000, like I can't take 5,000 clients at the moment, so I'm doing really well. Thank you.
Yeah.
But what normally people say is, hey, Mitchell, what's executive abundance? And then I can explain it.
Okay.
It's not too different than some of the things that you're working with. Right. It's a new model. Currently did a keynote on it, writing the book, and I'm doing a PhD exploring that piece of it. I could put research in place that other people can come behind me and grow on top of. But that's one piece of it, and that's the executive coaching piece. That's not necessarily scalable, other than the person I touches hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands. But it's not the same. So I also do a LinkedIn program. 80% of the time, your CPoP is a pain point versus pleasure point. When you're attracting CEOs who have large egos, you want to do a pleasure point, which is why I did my 9-word CPoP. But for business leaders, CPoP brings a smile. Are you ready? So business leaders tired of slimy LinkedIn sales tactics.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. That one
Okay.
resonated with me when I first heard it, because I am honestly inundated with messages from different salespeople. It's really frustrating too, because oftentimes they don't even know what I do. They don't even take the time to actually look at my profile and look at my background before they reach out to me. Anyways, I digress. Continue.
So what I might encourage you to consider today is sticking with, at least for your CPOP, underrepresented leaders. Because it's been what you're doing, you have case studies, you have focus on that. You can easily start sharing and writing about multifaceted executives. And what's interesting though is there's a really big overlap between the two. I will encourage you to stick with that. That said, if you wake up tomorrow morning and you're like, nope, Mitchell, I got to do multifaceted, I will not be unhappy. Okay. So I did two.
Yeah, I see
And
them
these are
here.
words you said. The first one was a pain point. Underrepresented leaders tired of playing corporate politics. That one is so amazingly powerful. You know exactly what it is. It's the same as slimy LinkedIn sales tactics.
Sure. Yep.
And what you mentioned is a couple stories. These are things that you do. These are tactics that you do to help them not play. Well, how do you not play corporate politics? Well, you got to be yourself. And that's where the second one came from, is a little bit more on the positive side. Underrepresented leaders living their, in all caps, authentic life. And what you could do with there is turn it into an acronym. I got one I'll share with you that I pulled together. You know, it could be tapping human excellence, igniting respect. What you got to think about is, do you want to lead with tired of playing corporate politics? That's where I lean. Not that that's as important, because it doesn't matter what I think. What matters is what you think. Or do you want to lean with living their authentic life?
Yeah, that's tough when you kind of have to choose and narrow it down. I feel like your clients probably have a difficult time doing that, because they're like, I want everything. I do everything. And that's the thing. A multifaceted executive, they do everything. They've done everything. So again, it makes it hard to narrow it down. Here's the thing. I would say that with the executives, they also very much do not like to play corporate politics. They either have done it or do it because that is just the norm in their environment, or all that they know based on advancing in their career. So it's interesting, because that aspect of it and the authenticity of it, it applies to both audiences. I want to reflect a little bit more, because you've definitely given me some things to think about. If you are a do-it-yourself person, try this at home. If you have difficulty, if you get stuck, that's where Mitchell is here to help you through it.
So let me do one thing for you. Based on how you responded, I'm going to pick one. And what I want to do is share your tell me more. Because the most natural thing that happens when you share a CPOP is you want the referral partner or the prospect to say, tell me more.
Right.
Right. So I'm going to pick one. I'm going to share tell me more. Now you'll notice the tell me more is not memorized. That is going to be very contextual.
Sure.
Right. So if somebody said to you, Amanda, who are you? What do you do? What you could say is, listen, throughout my years of working, there's an audience that so resonates with what I do and I add so much value to. That would be the hook. Then you're going to say, underrepresented leaders tired of playing corporate politics. And then if they don't say, tell me more, they most likely will. Well, what do you mean? Tired of playing? Of course, we're all tired of playing it. Well, let me tell you what that means. Lots of times I'm interacting with these multifaceted executives. They're doing so many different things and they wear so many different hats, and the hats they wear at home and with friends and with family and with one job and another job, they're all different hats. And they're tired of it. You know what I do? I help them see their authentic self. I help them figure out how they can show up in such a way where they are respected in every place that they show up. There's some really interesting and simple tricks and techniques that I share, and the end result is magic.
I love that. I have not been positioning it that way, but also have not gone through the CPoP formula until now. So thank you so much again, Mitchell. Like, this has been a value add for me, and I'm sure it serves as one for our audience today. As we wrap up here, I know you wanted to share a little bit more about the social side. Let's lead with that in terms of one of the ways to connect with you. So how can people connect with you? How can they learn more about the LinkedIn social selling side of it? And then we'll go from there.
Well, thank you. The best way to reach out to me is through my website. It's mitchelllevy.com. There you could learn about Social Complement. You could book time on my calendar. You can see the programs that I'm focused on. It's a program that helps you reach out and connect and have conversations with other people using LinkedIn. Now, this approach is no different than any other program. Better than some, worse than others. What's different is that you have Mitchell Levy. I'm going to help you play in the playground that you personally were meant to play in. And when it's time to change and it's time to adjust, you have a group of peers that you could bounce ideas off of. That's where it's different. We want to surround ourselves with the type of people who are doing really cool things that are really living the way they want to live. They're living their authentic self. This is exactly what you're doing. Being part of the Social Complement, so that's just socialcomplement.com, but you can get there through the Mitchell Levy site. Being part of that community is going to change who you are and how you show up, because it's going to give you the opportunity to play and also have partners to play with.
Thank you so much for sharing. And I already know I'm going to tap into the Social Complement myself. Again, thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom today, for being a guest speaker. For those that are with us, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Multifaceted Executive, and download this and other episodes on Spotify. Thank you all so much for tuning in to The Multifaceted Executive, where each episode reminds us that leadership looks different from every seat at the table. Cheers.